After the terrifying ordeal at Margaret's crumbling house, Sarah believed she was finally free. The weight of the doll's curse seemed to lift as she watched the ruins of the house swallow Annabelle, trapping her inside the debris. Shaking, exhausted, and bruised, Sarah barely made it home that night. For the first time in weeks, she collapsed into her bed and slept without the whispers. No dreams, no nightmares, just the cold, comforting embrace of silence. But as we know, silence never lasts long in stories like this. A week passed. Sarah felt herself slowly returning to normal. The shadows that once loomed in every corner of her mind seemed to fade. Her hands no longer trembled when she reached for the light switch at night. The whispers that haunted her every breath were gone. Her friends even noticed the change in her, a spark of life returning to her pale, tired eyes. They convinced her to join them for a night out, a celebration of her victory over whatever terror had plagued her. That night, Sarah really laughed for the first time since it all began. She even let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was truly over. But she didn't realize that some curses are like shadows. You can run from them, but they're always there, just behind you, waiting for the perfect moment to return. It happened on the drive home. As Sarah pulled into her driveway, she reached into her bag for her keys. That's when she heard the faint, familiar sound that sent icy chills down her spine. A whisper, soft, almost indistinct, but unmistakable. Sarah. Her heart raced as she spun around in the car, scanning the darkness outside. Nothing. No one. The street was empty, bathed in the orange glow of the streetlights. She took a shaky breath, chalking it up to the wind, her overactive imagination playing tricks on her. But deep down, she knew. The whispers were back. That night, Sarah barely slept. The whisper followed her, growing louder with each passing hour. By dawn, she was certain of one thing: Annabelle wasn't gone. The curse hadn't been broken. If anything, it was stronger than before. The next day, strange things began to happen again. It started with small things: doors that she knew she'd locked swung open on their own. The temperature in her apartment dropped suddenly, even though the thermostat showed it was set to 72 degrees. Objects moved slightly, just enough to be unsettling. And then came the doll. 3 days after the whispers returned, Sarah found it. Annabelle, sitting in the middle of her living room. The same cracked porcelain face, the same lifelike eyes staring straight at her, but this time the doll's once dirty dress was pristine. It was as if Annabelle had been restored, renewed. The sight of the doll sitting there untouched and perfect made Sarah's blood run cold. She screamed, throwing the doll out the window, but when she turned around, it was sitting back in its place, staring, waiting. The curse was no longer just attached to the doll, it was attached to her. Desperate and terrified, Sarah sought out the paranormal investigator again. When he arrived at her apartment, his face was grim. He inspected the doll and the apartment, his fingers trembling as he examined the air, sensing the growing darkness that surrounded Sarah. "This isn't just any curse," he said. "It's evolving. It's feeding off you." "What does that mean?" Sarah whispered, clutching her arms as she tried to calm her shivering body. "It means Annabelle is becoming something much worse, something that can't be stopped." The investigator, now visibly shaken, suggested a final, dangerous ritual. This wasn't about destroying the doll anymore, it was about breaking the bond between Sarah and the curse. He warned her that this would be their last chance. If they failed, Annabelle would have her forever. The ritual was set to take place at the very site of Sarah's first encounter with the doll, her old apartment, now abandoned, shrouded in mystery. When they arrived, the building loomed over them like a haunted relic of the past, its windows dark and broken. Inside, the air was thick with an oppressive energy. Every step echoed, and the walls seemed to close in on them. The investigator wasted no time, setting up candles and drawing protective symbols on the floor. Sarah stood in the middle of the circle, her heart racing, her breath shallow. She could feel Annabelle's presence, stronger than ever. It was like a cold hand wrapped around her soul, squeezing tighter with every second. As the investigator began chanting, the room grew darker. The candles flickered, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. And then, out of the corner of her eye, Sarah saw Annabelle, no longer a doll, but a twisted, nightmarish figure standing in the corner. Its eyes gleamed red, its cracked face grinning with malice. The investigator's voice rose in urgency, but Sarah couldn't take her eyes off Annabelle as the figure began to move toward her, slowly, deliberately. The whispers filled the room, growing louder, more desperate. The walls shook, the floorboards creaked, and Sarah felt an icy hand brush against her neck. "Sarah," the voice hissed, "you can't escape me." Suddenly, the candles blew out, plunging the room into total darkness. Sarah screamed as something cold and sharp wrapped around her ankles, pulling her toward the corner where Annabelle stood, waiting. She struggled, kicking and thrashing, but the grip tightened. The investigator shouted something in the dark, his voice panicked, but Sarah couldn't make out the words. All she could hear was the deafening roar of whispers and Annabelle's laughter echoing in her ears. In the chaos, a blinding light erupted from the circle, and the grip on her ankles loosened. The investigator's voice rang out, louder than before, and the darkness seemed to retreat. But as Sarah crawled away from the corner, she knew it wasn't over. Not yet. When the ritual ended, the room fell silent. The air was still. The investigator slumped to the floor, exhausted. "It's done," he said, his voice weak. "Annabelle, she's gone." But Sarah knew better. That night, as she lay in bed, too tired to even close her eyes, she heard it. The soft, familiar whisper coming from the hallway. "Sarah, I'm still here." Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this spine-chilling story, make sure to subscribe for more terrifying tales. And remember, some stories have a way of finding you, long after the video ends.